Okay, so how's everybody doing? So this is going to be the tug build, the Seaspan Corsair, owned by Seaspan, who is owned by Washington Corporation, who owns SRY, the railroad in which I model, aka River Road. And this is going to be one of the marine subjects. I'm going to be doing the front of the ferry for offloading and loading cars as an interchange into the imaginary world. And then this tug usually handles a lot of the barge work around the barge slip. So I'm going to build this. Now, I don't have drawings for it. I only have data and photographs, and that's all I need. I'm not building a museum model. If I'm going to build a museum model, I'm going to have plans. I'm going to have blueprints. That's not what this is. It's just a rendition of this tug. However it turns out, I don't care. I'm going to have fun building it, and I hope some of the techniques that I do and show will encourage others to try scratch building themselves and to not get too hung up if it's just a practice piece. Because at the end of the day, every model is a practice piece for the next one. And every now and again we pump out a good model, but we never know, right? So I know roughly the dimensions here that I got from Seaspan. Length overall is 82 feet, or metric 25.24 meters. And the breadth is 24 by 8 feet, and the draft. But I don't really need the draft because it's going to be waterline, okay? So a lot of this, from this rib, like you see this rub rail right here on the hull, that is on, like I'm building from this up, okay? Now, I would love to have a shear for this and forms and lines, you know, like for the hull, but I don't. But that's okay. I've built quite a few ship models in the past. Kits, scratch build, wooden plankers, steel ships. So I'm fairly confident that I'll get a fairly good shape that'll be good enough to build this tug with. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to take those measurements and I just convert them with an HO scale ruler. Forgive me for those that already know how to do this. So if it's 82 feet long, let's say, because it's just over 82 feet long, I know that that's about 11 3/8 on a standard ruler, okay? 11 3/8. So I have this piece of wood here. This is 3/8 plywood. It's 7 ply, by the way, and it's by Midwest products. Like these are for RC aircraft, like the older ones, I guess, for firewalls for gas engines, whatever. Anyway, this is a nice straight kiln dried almost piece. So like it's not going to warp anytime soon. And I'll seal this later with some Varathane. We'll talk about that later. So this pretty much covers, like this rectangle plywood will cover the waterline hull plate, okay? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to establish half of this hull shape with the plastic template. I'm going to use this batten right here to get the curve, like from the bow and then to the stern. The stern is almost rectangular, and then it just sort of is rounded off on the rear end of this tug. So I'm going to do that with this plastic, which is 60 thou, and I've pinned it here and I've drilled holes in this batten so I can bend it and pin it and just eyeball and get that shape, because it's not totally vertical, right? The actual hull, if I can show you this picture, see there's the water line where the ply would be, like, but you see how it flares up the bow? Like it curls over from the midpoint or so to the transom. It's kind of a unique shape. And then it comes up from that plate, the plywood plate, waterline, and it sort of flares out, which is cool. You can see the tires along the top there. So that's what I want to bear in mind. So the actual width of the ship, I'm not sure if they mean to the gunwale here or to the edge of the bow. I'm not sure, but it doesn't really matter because I can chase that or remedy that close enough later, right? Okay, so I'm going to make the shape out of this first, just to the center. I'm going to cut this out, and then I'm going to trace it onto the wooden plate, and then I'm going to flip it over so it'll be perfectly symmetrical on both sides, okay? So I only need to do half, all right? Okay, so I got the 1/2 of the water line done here. So when you look at the shape, you know, it does tend to betray the, you know, the shear of the hull, because it's a smaller footprint than the upper works, like the upper gunwale and deck and so on. So, and you can see how it tapers in here. See that? Like, see, this is unique. So you got a line that runs along here and then into the bow of the ship like that. And then you have the side of the bow, and it goes up on an angle, and then it tucks over top of the deck. You know, it's gonna, I might have to plank this with plastic, I'm not sure yet, but I'm gonna build forms up, I think, to get this shape, because it's gonna be a tricky one. I mean, you could do below this section here out of wood, like balsa wood even, if you want, like a soft balsa, and you could block up some of the bow in balsa, like that would work too. But you're gonna have to sheet it with plastic. I mean, well, you don't have to. You can seal it with Varathane sand and fill and simulate that. But I want to sheet it with really thin, like 10 thou, because I want to get all the dents and stuff. You know, the damage on the hull and stuff like that. And I think if I use thin, like double skin it like that, then this will show a lot of this, hopefully. Okay. So I have this line here. So, and the reason why I used this bar, like this batten down flat, so it's stiffer and I can pin it. I could use it the other way, it'll bend easier, but this works good. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to draw a line like this. Okay, and I'll just have you know, like, I'm not a nautical engineer, so I'm just a model maker. There's a big difference. So now that that's done, I can freehand that line with a knife. So I'll just pull these off, which is the batten. I'll pull these pins out, okay? And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to, see that? That's the half that I want. So I'm going to knife that, and then just snap that off, and then I'm going to use that to trace onto our waterline plate. Okay? Now, we have our waterline template, which I can now transfer onto here. This is a little bit longer than the boat now. I'll cut that off later. So that's my bow there. And then I'll lay this on like this. And you might want to pin it down so it doesn't move, but I'm just going to shoot it from here. And I'll run this line like this, right? And then I'm going to flip it over like this. There's a little bit of a return on the bow where there's a big heavy keel on this boat. It's a tugboat, so they push ships around a lot, so they got pretty heavy keels. And I was going to run this like so. Now I'll keep this because this will help me establish some of the shape of the hull as I build it up. When I build the hull plates and forms, I mean, it'll help guide me somewhat, but I want to hang on to this. So, okay, so there's the water line of the tug. So I'm just going to cut that out. You can cut that out on a scroll saw, or you can use a jigsaw, and then I'm going to sand that, and then probably plane it on a little bit of an angle. So there's a tiny bit of a taper on there, okay? And then I'll also finish drawing up some lines on here, so when I lay the forms, like the hull forms or bulkheads, and here when I figure out those, I'm going to probably cut some paper templates to do that, and then transfer it onto plastic, okay? And then I can run ribs like strips here, and then glue them to that just to build up the hull, okay? Okay, so I'll just show you where the waterline plate is gonna, you'll see the space that I have here. It's not too dominant, right? So that's the idea. So when I built this, like you see the curve here, like that was factored in too. I knew that if I had a curved shelf layout fascia like this, that I would have some water here, space. I mean, if it was just a straight linear line, you know, like I wouldn't need that much really, right? I could need only about half of this, but I built this for a reason. I wasn't sure the size of the tug, but now I know. And it can be sit there even moored up to the here or whatever, waiting for the barge. I mean, you know, whatever, it'll make for a nice feature. And I can put felt on the bottom of this and then just move it around. You know, it's kind of cool. And it'll sit in front of the barge too, or the barge ramp as well. There's room there if the ferry's not there. Okay, so that's the idea, right? And I can turn it around. It won't be fixed. And that's why I did the water this way too. It's got a little small chop, you know, a 15 knot chop kind of thing or whatever. And with some felt under there, you know, it can sit and I can move it and stage it. Okay. Okay, so there's a bit of a, I had to cut part of this off. I almost forgot. There was a little bit too long. I would have made it too long, this part, but this is cut to size to length. So I need to add a little bit of a tuck here on the waterline. So I'm going to use this French curve. It's got these sort of oblong kind of curves to them. And I'm just going to find one here that I think will look suitable. And just add it in. And then just cut this off. Okay, so just to summarize quick, there's the plate, the waterline plate, and you can see that I just cut the one side out of plastic. It's got that shape, right? And then I just flip it over on the center line and do the same. Okay. Okay, so you can see here what I'm doing is I'm varathaning the plywood waterline plate. Okay. So why am I doing that? Well, I want to seal this wood. I mean, it's totally straight and level, which is nice. I'm going to seal both sides. I don't always seal plywood with varathane both sides, like bench work, for example, I'd mentioned with the shelf though, because you want it to breathe underneath. But if you varathane one side, whenever you put water, isopropyl alcohol, etc., it'll suspend it so it can evaporate and it won't seep into the wood. But in this case, this is a model plate and I want to seal the whole piece, and it's good to seal both sides because if one side isn't done, or pardon me, if you only do one side, it'll pull when it shrinks and it can warp the plywood. But if you do both sides, it won't warp. Okay, so let's just talk about the bulkheads or the formers. Okay, we'll just call them formers, like these pieces here. Okay, so this is the waterline plywood plate, right, that I showed how to build that and cut that out. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to glue strips. This is just the scrap left over from the batten that I used to make the curve of this waterline plate. And I'm going to use that for these pieces here. I'm going to glue these down. I'll show you. So remember how I varathaned this? I varathaned this plywood, right? A couple coats. So when I use CA, and then I'll just mention this one more time, you sand the plastic. You put some toothing, because this is mechanical bond, right? It's not a chemical bond. But because of the varathane, it sort of simulates a bit of a chemical bond from the CA to the varathane, which is already embedded in the wood. So when you put this down with a bead of CA, you're not going to have much time to move it around because it's going to bite right away and it's not coming off, okay? So you want to make sure that you draw a line and that you get it lined up, and maybe cut the piece a little bit long so it overhangs the plywood plate a bit. You can sand it later, okay? I don't like to do this, but I'm just going to do it now because I got to get that glue off of there. Because that's where that former is going to go. I'm not worried about a bead squeezing out. I'm not worried about a bead squeezing out there because this next plate goes in like that. So just like this one. So here's a piece that I cut. Now look, so I've already done a builder's drawing here. Right, this is all I need right now. Okay, this is an elevation. I drew it from all my photos. Okay, and I pointed out how this is up to the individual, how you lay all this up. It's a builder's model. So 100 people could build this project and they're all going to be different. And that's fine because everybody's unique the way they solve problems and build things. And that's the fun of it. So you can see here, this is the first bulkhead right here. This is where the stairs go up and there's a deck. Like these bulkheads here are what going to support this upper deck. Okay. I'm not worried about camber yet. Like I might introduce a little bit of camber. Okay, you know, you put a little bit of cambering so the water runs off to the scuppers on the outside. In 187 scale, it's up to the modeler. I mean, you can run a flat deck, but I find if you introduce a little bit of camber, it looks good. But I'm not going to worry about that right now. I can build that up with strip later. So I just want to say at this point, this next former that I'm putting in, I want to introduce a little bit of not only an outward. Okay, so you see there's the first one, it's vertical. The next one is a little bit flared out. Then the next one's going to be flared out a little bit too, but it's going to be sort of concave shaped a little bit, okay? And the best way to get that, or to get close to it, is to try a French curve again and just try to copy the same curve on both sides. And there's different ways of doing that, but I'm just going to make a mark on here, make pencil marks, and then flip it over. So that's what I'm going to do there. I just have to decide how far out I want it to flare. That's the only thing. So I'll just draw a line. I'm going to make a mark right here and a mark right here. I'm going to draw this little flare like that. That might be a bit too much, but that's kind of the idea. And then it sort of goes around up to the bow. So I'll just fiddle around with that and see if I can. Maybe that would be better up further up here. So you got lots of photos, and you study your photos, you look at all the angles that you can. That doesn't show a flare there, but I have several that do, and it's quite distinct. That one you can't see because the tires are in the way, but it does flare a little bit. I might move that flared part more to the bow, because, and you can see it there. It's starting to flare, but it's a ways up, maybe up in here somewhere between these two. Okay. Just want to mention here that I'm tightening up these forms a little bit more because I need a good anchor point for my sheeting or planking at the bow. I don't want that to come loose, and the tighter the curve you make, you want the formers a little bit closer together. But there's no standard rule for it. It's just, you know, what you feel. Basically, I just go by experience. I've done this before. But so you can see where I'm tapering these forms, and you can see there's a little bit of a flare here on these forms that comes up. As it goes narrow to the waterline, there's just a little bit of a flare, and then it's fairly rounded off, like it's fairly blunt nose on tugs, because they have sort of a battering ram on the front of them. You know, a lot of steel, because they push a lot, right? With the, you know, there's a big rubber truck tires on the front, and there's, you know, they're quite beefy on the nose tugs for a good reason. Okay, so I just want to talk about prepping the deck or preparing the deck with evergreen plastic. So the goal is to get up off of this plywood. Like, this is obviously the main base of the model, but I want to be building 100% of the plastic here so I can use solvent, right? And I use this, as I mentioned before, and the reason why I use it is there's others like Mech and other brand names, but this seems to have the lowest odor that I can tolerate. That's all that is. Like, I know there's lots of other thin cements, Tamiya, but Tamiya is too powerful for me. But anyway, I can't stand it. It gives me a headache. So I want to get to the point where I can build my model 100% with Plastruct, with exceptions. If I got to tack some brass parts to the plastic, then I'll have to use CA or epoxy or something. So you can see here that I've got all the formers in, and they're all CA'd, right? With these little rib pieces here. Like, those were sanded, roughed, because CA is a mechanical bond, as I mentioned before, so it's nice and solid. It's not coming off. Because remember why? Varathane. If you put Varathane or any clear coat on wood and you put CA on it and press metal or brass or most notably plastic, it's not coming off. So there's something about the Varathane clear coat that just makes any rough texture or even a smooth texture super bondable with CA. So you can see I'm almost there, and what I'm doing here is I'm building up the camber of the deck first. Like, I'm going to sheet this. So this is 40 thou sheet here, and this is 20 thou, 20 thou, 20 thou. Why is that? Well, because I want to have a seam to weld to here when I put the deck on, which is this sheet plastic. I don't want to wrestle around trying to get CA and push it down. I can get a nice clean weld and work it down, because this is CA'd now on here and it's not coming off. And then I added another strip on top just to raise it to the same amount, because there's going to be a curve here that's going to look like boat decks are like this. There's a camber on them. Okay, they're not flat like that. Once you get over 1/350th scale or whatever, I think, or, well, it depends. I mean, I've seen people put camber on 1/350th, but generally, like, a good model will have camber in it, like that, like all ships and boats do, for the most part. So the water runs off to the scuppers. Okay, so that's what this is going to do. It's a little bit higher in the center here, and then I'm just going to glue the center and then just glue the outside so that the deck curves down this way. I'm not worried about the rear curving down because it's covered. Like, there's a hole, like the gunwale goes right over the back like that. So now I want to lay in a strip to curve it here. I'll just show you this. So I just take a piece of, in this case, is 20 thou by 125, number 126, which is the same as this. And I just nibble cut halfway through the strip. I just nibble cut like every 1/8 of an inch halfway through, just push through, so that I can bend this and fan this out, see? And I can make a turn. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay a bead of CA here. Oops, that's a bit too much. And then I'm just going to glue this end on first, just push this down. And remember, with that Varathane, look out, because when you put it down, it's not going to move. It's going to be very aggressive. Okay, so then I'm just going to chase this around like this. Okay. I'm not worried about what it's going to look like, because it's going to get covered anyway, and it's going to be all buried in the hull. but it'll give me the anchor point that I need for the deck. And I'll just cut that off right there. Sometimes when you're doing this on video, it just doesn't go as smoothly as you would like this side here. But it doesn't matter because there's enough there now. So when I glue down the deck, I have a seam I can work at underneath, and I can weld all the way along to plastic, see? And then once I sheet the outside of the hull, it's all good, okay? Okay, so I just want to revisit this quick again because I made a mistake about telling you that this was 40 thou. This is actually 60 thou. So I wrote them right here. So this is for my rear camber on this deck. Now you can do it other ways too. There's no one way to do this, but I just find in this particular case, this is the easiest way to do it and the funnest way for me right now. So right here you can see that this main wide plate here is 60 thou thick. This one is 40 thou. This is 30. 20. Okay, I just eyeballed them in from the center out. I didn't measure. Like if you're an engineer and you're building a model based on engineering specs, you better be able to do your math. But this is just a model that's not necessary. And then I added a 20 thou strip in the very center just to keep the camber from the center of the hull fairly consistent to the outboard of the waterline. And then you can see that this is 20 thou, so I'll probably just sheet that over. See? Very similar to the overpass deck. Remember I put the camber on the overpass deck for the roadway, right? So the water runs off. So it's a subtle detail you don't have to do, but it looks good like if somebody notices it, or you will feel good about the model because it helps you to build the rest of the superstructure properly, because there's obviously going to be, you know, a little bit of curvature on the rear walls and so on to match the deck, or you can use cove base to cheat that or whatever. And so I will do the same, like this pattern, okay? 60, 40, 30, 20, with the 20 strip in the center just to keep that, you know, that nice deck camber on the front here of the bow deck, okay? I'm just exaggerating here, but that's what I want up there too. And it's really evident on top because you see it like where the water runs off and the rust streaks and everything. So like it makes sense, right? If you see water running off a boat out of scuppers and stuff, that there's a camber there. Anyway, I just thought I'd just throw that detail in if you were wondering, okay? So once this is done, like I'm almost off the wood now, right? So except for the side here, which ultimately is going to be sheeted. So this tug is made from steel, right? So now we're going to be welding the whole model just like the prototype with strips to sheet it. And since it's not a full hull, it's not that hard. You don't have to make a lot of compound curves. So, okay.